What if the most beloved modern royal was, in fact, the ultimate historical weapon? What if the fairy tale we were all fed, the shy, beautiful girl who became a princess, was nothing less than a 500-year-old act of revenge? A curse returned to the very heart of the crown that tried to break it. Forget the Spencers, the wealthy, polished, respectable aristocrats we were told defined her lineage. That is merely the surface. The story the official record chose to leave intact, because beneath the quiet dignity of the Spencer name, hidden deep in the blood, is a dynasty soaked in betrayal, shattered vows, and the cold, unyielding silence of the executioner's block, the Tudors. You are likely thinking this is impossible. History books insist the male Tudor line died with King Edward VI, and the dynasty itself ended when Queen Elizabeth I drew her final, regal breath. Officially, legally, that is true. The power structure was finished, but power is temporary. Blood, however, is eternal, and the secret of Princess Diana's ancestry lies with a woman history often forgets or dismisses as a footnote: Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister. She was not the tragic, fanatical Catholic queen known as Bloody Mary. This was another Mary, a girl of legendary beauty, famed across every court in Europe for her spirit, her vivid auburn gold hair, and the fiery intensity in her eyes that could turn from a soft plea to a scorching glare in an instant. Henry adored her, certainly. He called her his pearl. But in the world of Tudor politics, a pearl was not something to be cherished. It was a jewel to be locked away, a valuable commodity to be traded for diplomatic gain. In 1514, Mary's fate was sealed by her brother's pen. At the tender age of 18, she was shipped across the Channel to France to marry King Louis XII. Imagine the suffocating horror of it. She was full of life, bursting with the fire of youth and the passion of a true romantic, yet forced to wed a man more than 3 decades, ravaged by gout, perpetually unwell, his health failing with every chilly breath he took, walking into the cold, ancient stone corridors of the French court. She was instantly surrounded by suspicion and veiled contempt. The French nobility saw her not as a queen, but as a political pawn, a symbol of a fragile English alliance. The atmosphere was one of calculated politeness, a suffocating velvet cage. A witness from the time, a guard whose name was Thomas, wrote to his son years later that the sound of Mary's laughter was the only true warmth he ever heard. Echo through the Chateau de Saint, a fleeting spark against the constant chill of court intrigue. Yet, fate, for a brief, startling moment, intervened on Mary's behalf. Just 82 days after the disastrous, politically motivated wedding, King Louis XII finally succumbed to his many ailments and was dead. Mary was a widow, and, crucially, a widow in possession of her own person, free from the marital constraints her brother had imposed. But for a princess in the 16th century, freedom was a mirage, a held breath before the next political maneuver. She knew her status as an unattached royal widow was an anomaly Henry VIII would correct immediately. She was his bargaining chip, his most potent pawn in the endless, brutal game of European power politics. The next husband Henry chose for her would be another king, another alliance, another sacrifice. But Mary Tudor was a rebel, and she had a dangerous, treasonous secret, a promise she'd made back in England. Before she was even forced onto the ship to France, she had fallen desperately in love with Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk. Brandon was everything Louis was not: handsome, robust, a renowned jouster and soldier, and, most importantly, Henry VIII's closest companion and confidant. Their bond had formed at the very heart of the English court, a forbidden, passionate affair that had blossomed under the king's own nose. They had sworn an oath. If she were to be left a widow, she would choose her second husband for herself. She would choose him. Defying Henry VIII was, to put it mildly, a death sentence. The king's wrath was legendary, unpredictable, and absolute. But for Mary, for this man, the risk of the Tower of London, of the executioner's blade, was a price she was willing to pay. When news of Louis's death reached England, Henry moved with characteristic, overwhelming speed. He immediately dispatched Charles Brandon to France. The king's official orders were simple: escort my widowed sister home. But Henry, in his suspicion, knew of their affection, and there was an unspoken, yet brutally sharp, secondary command: do not touch her. He pressed into Charles's hand his heavy, gold signet ring, a visible symbol of his absolute authority. This, he commanded, is my faith in you. Do not betray it. Imagine Charles, now, on the Channel crossing, the salty spray whipping his face, the immense weight of that signet ring burning in his pocket. He was torn between two impossible, crushing loyalties: the king who had raised him from obscurity and given him everything, and the woman who was his only chance at true, personal happiness. To choose Mary was to risk a traitor's death. To obey Henry was to betray his soul. Charles Brandon arrived at the French court and found Mary cloaked in the black, voluminous velvet of royal mourning. Yet her eyes, when they met his, burned with a desperate fire. She was no longer a timid, obedient girl. That night, she cornered him. "Will you marry me?" she demanded, not as a question, but as a final, desperate ultimatum. Charles hesitated, pleading with her, describing Henry's legendary wrath, painting vivid pictures of the scaffold, the axe, and the precedent of Edmond de la Pole, executed simply for existing as a distant, theoretical threat to the throne. But Mary, the true Tudor, would not be refused. She whispered, fierce and absolute, "If you do not marry me now, you will take me back to England, and I will be forced into another marriage. And I will make sure the king knows it was you who refused me. I will tell him you broke his sister's heart." It was a masterful, devastating stroke of manipulation. She trapped her lover between two inescapable dooms: the king's fury if he married her, or the king's fury if he abandoned her and was exposed as a heartbreaker by the king's own sister. And so, in a tiny, obscure chapel on the very outskirts of Paris, some accounts whisper of the Chapelle Saint-Chang in the royal residence itself, but most point to a smaller, secret church with only a trembling, terrified old priest and a handful of frightened servants as witnesses. They defied the most dangerous man in Europe. As Charles slid a borrowed ring onto Mary's finger, the silence of the treasonous vows was shattered. A sudden, violent gust of wind burst the chapel doors wide open, snuffing out nearly half the candles and plunging the sacred room into a heart-stopping, ominous shadow. Father Michel, the nervous cleric, gasped, clutching his crucifix at the undeniable, terrifying omen. They were married, and they were, surely, doomed. The journey back to England was not a honeymoon. It was a torment, a slow, agonizing death march. Every groan of the ship's timbers, every wave crashing against the hull, sounded to them like the constant, relentless pounding of Henry's fist on the door of their cabin. They could not eat, could barely sleep. Letter after letter was frantically drafted to the king, pleas for mercy. Desperate offers to relinquish their wealth, to sign away Mary's enormous French dowry, to strip themselves bare if it meant survival. Mary wrote of their past closeness, appealing to the brotherly love Henry had once professed. Charles, meanwhile, directed his desperate pleas to Cardinal Wolsey, Henry's ruthless, all-powerful advisor, known throughout the kingdom as the Alter Rex, the other king. They offered everything: their jewels, their estates, their future income. But when their ship finally landed at Dover, the welcome was colder than the Channel in winter. There were no banners, no cheers, only a small, silent delegation of royal officials. One of them, a Sir Giles, a stout man with cold, calculating, fish-like eyes, pointedly refused to address Mary as Your Grace. He looked at Charles with a potent mixture of contempt and grim pity. The message was physically palpable. You are no longer the king's friend. You are a traitor. They were immediately summoned to London, not as honored guests, but as prisoners of state. The news of their secret, illicit marriage had already spread like a wildfire, fueled by court gossip and public anticipation of a scandalous, bloody end. By the time they reached the capital, the entire court was buzzing. At the center of this storm was Henry VIII, angrier than he had ever been in his life. This was not merely a political transgression. It was a profound, deeply personal betrayal. Mary was his sister, the family he was supposed to control. Charles was his closest companion, his drinking partner, his jousting companion. Together, they had made an utter fool of him on the European stage, undermining his authority and his power. And Henry VIII was a man who tolerated no fools, particularly when they mocked his sovereignty. The road from Dover to London, which should have been a royal procession, became a slow, public spectacle of disgrace. At every inn, Mary and Charles were confined to their quarters, guarded, treated as disgraced criminals. Servants who had once bowed deeply now deliberately averted their eyes. One night, a stable boy who had once idolized Charles slipped a crude anonymous drawing under their door. The Tower of London, two figures standing on the scaffold. The message was unmistakable, horrifying. When they finally arrived in London, the terrifying silence was deafening. No welcoming crowds, no shouts of welcome, not even the expected jeers of contempt, just an unsettling, empty silence. They were separated immediately. Mary was placed in beautiful chambers, ironically filled with fresh flowers and silver platters of fudicage wrapped in velvet. The doors locked firmly from the outside. Charles was led to a bare, cold stone chamber with a single, heavily barred window that overlooked nothing but a blank inner wall. His world had shrunk to 4 cold walls, and the relentless gnawing dread in his own mind. This was Henry's first move, not the immediate execution, not the dungeon, but absolute, suffocating isolation. He wanted fear to eat them alive, to make them beg for the mercy of the quick death. For weeks, they heard nothing, no judgment, no word of mercy, just that heavy, silent, weta silence that became a living, predatory thing. Finally, the summons came, but only for Charles. He was marched through the elaborate, twisting labyrinth of corridors at Greenwich Palace. The walls were hung with enormous tapestries, depicting Henry's magnificent triumphs, his glorious battles, his endless royal power. Each triumphant scene seemed to mock Charles's impending doom. He was led, not to the throne room, surrounded by the court, but to a small, private study. And there, behind a massive, intimidating oak desk, sat Henry VIII. The king was not shouting, he was not raging. That would have been merciful. Instead, he was unnervingly calm, deliberately cleaning his fingernails with a razor-sharp dagger, as if Charles's entire fate were nothing more than a casual, tiresome afterthought. For a full minute, Henry said absolutely nothing, letting Charles stand there, sweating through his fine clothes, his heart pounding a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. Then, in a voice that was almost chillingly gentle, he spoke. "Charles, my friend, the man I raised from nothing. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Charles was offered a chair, his knees weak. Henry leaned forward, the dagger still glinting in his hand. "You know the law. To marry a princess, the king's own sister, without consent, that is treason, and the punishment for treason is death. The headsman sharpens his axe every morning. Sometimes, he asks his wife, 'Who will it be today?' I wonder." The words hung in the air like a taut, invisible noose. Then, Henry smiled a smile that was cold, terrifying, and calculated. "But your head is worth less to me on a spike than your life is in my debt." Henry stood, pacing slowly toward the window, his form silhouetted against the light. "You have not only taken my sister," he stated, his voice now ringing with quiet, Absolute authority. You have taken my authority. You have made me a fool before all of Europe. That, Charles, I will never forgive, but I will let you live." Then came the punishment of financial and psychological obliteration. First, the money. Mary and Charles would be forced to repay every single penny of her immense French dowry. They would sign over the income from their vast estates, effectively becoming noble in name only, but destitute beggars in brutal reality. Second, the humiliation. They would be forced to remarry, publicly, in front of the entire, sneering court, kneeling before Henry to beg abject forgiveness. Their epic love story would not be remembered as a defiant romance. It would be publicly displayed as utter, total submission. But the final condition, the true heart of Henry's revenge, was the cruelest of all. "Your children," Henry said, his voice now hard as polished granite, "they will live because I allow it. They will carry no claim, no royal title. They will be watched. Their very existence is approved by me. You wanted a family of love? You will have it. But it will be a family chained, forever, to my crown. You will never, truly, be free." Charles Brandon left that room a broken man. He had walked in fearing a quick, merciful death. He walked out condemned to something infinitely worse. A lifetime of suffocating servitude to the one man who despised him most. A man who held the absolute power of life and death over every single person he loved. And so, Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon lived on. A glorious couple on the outside, a hollow shell on the inside. They had several children, 2 daughters surviving into adulthood, Frances and Eleanor. On the surface, their life at Westhorpe Hall seemed enviable: fine clothes, feasts, a great household. But it was all a carefully staged, suffocating performance, played solely for an audience of one, Henry VIII. Every decision, every dinner guest, every whispered conversation was monitored, recorded, and reported back to London. Their loyal seeming steward, Master Croft, was in reality the king's personal, dedicated spy, sending bi-weekly reports detailing their every movement. Westhorpe Hall was not a sanctuary. It was a gorgeous, velvet-lined prison. The children grew up in this strange, terrifying duality, privileged, yet perpetually haunted. They were the granddaughters of a king, nieces of a reigning monarch, yet they were absolutely forbidden to speak of it. Their royal blood was not a blessing, but a crushing curse, a ticking political time bomb. Frances, the eldest, inherited her mother's legendary fire. She was proud, strong-willed, and unafraid. Yet, she too was a captive in Henry's enormous, invisible web. When she came of age, her marriage was not hers to choose. It was ruthlessly arranged by the crown occult, calculated union designed to control the dangerous, volatile Tudor blood coursing through her veins. She was married to Henry Grey, Marquis of Dorset. It was a respectable, solid match, but devoid of passion or love. It was another cage, with silk bars and gilded corners. Mary and Charles could only watch in agonizing silence as their own defiant fight for personal freedom was brutally denied to their daughter. This was Henry's true, deep revenge, a punishment that echoed across the generations. Frances and Henry Grey had 3 daughters, Jane, Catherine, and Mary. 3 girls whose blood carried both immeasurable promise and unimaginable peril. The most famous, of course, was Lady Jane Grey. She was the anti-Tudor, brilliant, bookish, a devout Protestant, fluent in Greek and Latin, happiest when lost in the philosophy of Plato. She wanted books, not crowns. Study, not the treacherous viper's nest of politics. But by the time she reached her teens, Henry VIII was finally dead, replaced by his sickly child son, Edward VI. Edward's court, dominated by ruthless Protestant lords, was terrified of Henry's Catholic daughter, Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, inheriting the throne. They desperately needed an alternative heir, someone with genuine Tudor blood, but with an unwavering Protestant faith. Their eyes landed on Jane Grey. She was the perfect, malleable pawn. Her parents, desperate for a taste of ultimate power, allied with the ambitious, brilliant, and utterly ruthless Duke of Northumberland. The deal was sealed. Jane would marry Northumberland's son, Guildford Dudley. Jane would be queen. She wept, she pleaded, she begged to be released from the horrifying imposition. But no, unleashed of all her cold, ambitious mother, Frances, she was brutally swept into the tidal wave of political ambition. In July 1553, Jane was proclaimed Queen of England. She was led to the Tower of London, not as a prisoner, but as a monarch. When the heavy, symbolic crown was placed upon her teenage head, it was so heavy she could barely hold her neck upright. Courtiers bowed, but their smiles were thin, false, and predatory. Jane was utterly alone. Her lady-in-waiting, a woman named Tilly, later recalled that the only time Jane managed a genuine smile was when she was reading a simple letter from her old tutor, Roger Ascham. For a brief, heartbreaking moment, she wasn't a queen. She was just a girl again, but the kingdom did not rally to her banner. They flocked instead to Mary Tudor, Henry's eldest daughter, whose claim, despite the religious differences, was undeniable and absolute. Within 9 devastating days, Jane's reign was over. Northumberland was executed. Jane, her husband, and her father were arrested in one final, gut-wrenching act of maternal cruelty. Frances, Jane's mother, the daughter of the defiant Mary, Tudor, abandoned her own child, begging the new Queen Mary for her own life, while leaving Jane to face the block alone. In February 1554, Jane watched from her desolate tower window as her young husband, Guildford Dudley, was led to his execution. She saw the humble cart carrying his headless body back past her chambers. A few harrowing hours later, it was her turn. She was only 17 years old. She mounted the scaffold with incredible calm and dignity. Blindfolded, she reached for the execution block, but in the final, dark moment of terror, she couldn't find it. "What shall I do?" she cried out in sudden, heart-stopping panic. "Where is it?" A guard gently guided her trembling hands to the cold, unforgiving wood. And there, in one final, terrifying moment, the bloodline born from Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon's defiant, forbidden love paid the ultimate, bloody price. The blade fell. The granddaughter of Henry VIII's sister lay dead. The king's dark revenge, it seemed, was finally complete. The execution of Lady Jane Grey should have been the absolute final end of it, a bloody full stop on a century-spanning story. But bloodlines, as history teaches us, are stubborn, persistent things. Henry VIII may have thought he'd destroyed Mary Tudor's entire legacy when Jane's head rolled on the scaffold. But he had tragically forgotten something. Jane had sisters, Catherine and Mary Grey, and their lives would prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the terrible curse of this bloodline was not finished. It would continue to echo down the centuries, a persistent, fatal whisper. Catherine Grey was everything her serious, studious sister Jane was not. Vivacious, charming, a magnetic personality, and by all accounts, strikingly, dangerously beautiful. But she carried the exact same lethal inheritance, Tudor blood, under the reign of her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. This blood was a death sentence waiting to happen. Elizabeth, famously, would never marry and stubbornly refused to name a successor. This left Catherine, as the senior descendant of Henry VII's younger sister, as the living, legitimate heir, presumptive in the eyes of many powerful Protestants. She was a permanent, breathing, undeniable alternative to the Queen herself. And Elizabeth, like her monstrous father, was paranoid to her very core. Catherine knew the horrific danger. She had watched her sister die for the crown she never wanted. She should have stayed quiet, stayed invisible, chosen a safe, political marriage. But she, too, was a descendant of the defiant Mary Tudor. She fell passionately in love with Edward Seymour, the Earl of Hertford. They married in total, utter secrecy. When Catherine's inevitable pregnancy became impossible to hide, Elizabeth's legendary fury erupted with the power of a volcano. The Queen did not choose execution. She chose a punishment infinitely more cruel, a slow, calculated torture. Elizabeth declared Catherine's secret marriage invalid, her children illegitimate, cutting them off from any and all claim to the throne. And then, she imprisoned her. Catherine was moved from one cold, dreary castle to the next, a psychological form of internal exile, never once allowed to see her beloved husband again. The constant separation, the cruel psychological torture, and the relentless despair wore her down. Catherine wasted away, dying at the tragically young age of 27. Officially, the cause was an unnamed illness. The truth, however, was a broken, shattered heart. The youngest sister, Mary Grey, was a different figure altogether. Born with dwarfism and a curved spine, she was treated by the court with a mixture of pity and contempt, often dismissed as a harmless, unthreatening figure, a figure of court novelty, no threat to anyone, surely. But Mary, too, carried the innate Tudor fire, the defiance born of Mary Tudor's first choice, and, like her sisters and her great-grandmother before her, she dared to marry for love, a love far beneath her station. Her choice: Thomas Keyes, the Queen's Sergeant Porter Senchley, the palace doorman, a robust man who stood 6 feet 6 inches tall, a towering figure next to the diminutive Mary. Elizabeth was not amused by this audacious act of personal defiance. For this crime, marrying for love and disrupting the delicate royal order, Mary, too, was placed under immediate, severe house arrest, separated from her husband for years. She died in obscurity. Another casualty of the crushing curse that began with a secret promise in a dusty French chapel generations earlier. The brutal message from the Tudor and subsequent Stuart crown was clear and absolute. This particular bloodline would never, ever be allowed to thrive. It would be imprisoned, stripped, diluted, and silenced into absolute nothingness. And for a long time, centuries, it worked. Catherine Grey's surviving children, declared illegitimate, were stripped of their royal proximity. They were reduced to the minor gentry. Their descendants became country squires, local parish priests, clergymen's wives. The fiery, dangerous Tudor blood thinned, forgotten, deliberately hidden deep in the quiet folds of English society. But bloodlines, as we have established, are not only stubborn, they are endlessly opportunistic. They have a terrifying way of finding cracks in the official narrative, of surviving in silence. Centuries passed. The Tudors faded into the realm of history books and plays. The Stuarts rose and fell in a blur of civil wars and restorations. The German-speaking Hanoverians claimed the throne, and the grey blood Mary Tudor's blood, the blood of defiance, slipped quietly, seamlessly, into a completely different family name, Spencer. For many generations, the Spencers were not royal, not even close to the center of power. They were wealthy, certainly successful sheep farmers, with a reputation for financial stability and good business sense. Respectable, unremarkable, but deep within the ancient roots of their family tree, hidden like a forgotten, priceless inscription on an old locket, ran the hot, dangerous blood of Mary Tudor, Charles Brandon, Jane Grey, and Catherine Grey. It survived. It waited. Fast forward to the turbulent modern 20th century. John Spencer, the 8th Earl Spencer, had a daughter, a quiet, shy girl with luminous, striking blue eyes. She worked as a kindergarten assistant, a job far removed from the glitter and brutal politics of royal life. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. That middle name, Frances, was not chosen at random. It was a clear, deliberate, family-reverenced name. passed down directly from her ancestor Frances Brandon, the daughter of Mary Tudor, and Charles Brandon, the mother of the executed Jane Grey. The name was a marker, a historical footnote that few understood. When Diana married Prince Charles, the heir apparent to the British throne, the world instantly called it a fairy tale, a commoner marrying into royalty. But it was not that at all. It was, in the grand, sweeping narrative of history, the most profound, devastatingly ironic twist imaginable. The bloodline that Henry VIII had tried, with all his immense power and rage, to erase the family he had humiliated, imprisoned, and shamed into permanent obscurity, was now, centuries later, returning. It was walking hand in hand, directly back into the very heart of the monarchy, through Diana. The volatile, defiant blood of Mary Tudor flowed back into the royal line. Through her, the genetic legacy of defiance, tragedy, and immense suffering was quietly, inexorably restored. Her son, Prince William, now the heir to the throne, carries that blood. The exact same blood that Henry VIII once deemed unfit for power. The same blood that saw a 17-year-old girl executed on a cold scaffold. The same blood that queens had tried desperately to suppress and kings had tried to erase from memory. It is back, and it will sit upon the throne of England. History, you see, is rarely a straight, predictable line. More often, it is a devastating, inevitable circle. Mary Tudor's, singular, defiant choice to marry Charles Brandon, for love, a choice that directly challenged a king, birthed a bloodline cursed by fear, humiliation, and death for nearly 5 centuries. That line was brutally punished, stripped of its status, forced into absolute silence. Yet, it endured, and centuries later, it returned, not as a shadowy political threat lurking in the darkness, but as the universally beloved princess, the mother of a future king. So, the next time you look at the iconic images of Princess Diana, or gaze upon her sons, William and Harry, look deeper than the Spencer pedigree, look past the Windsor's well-established lines. See the ghosts of another, darker family. See the fearless Mary Tudor, the girl who chose love over brutal duty. See Charles Brandon, who risked everything for that love. See Lady Jane Grey, the child queen who walked so bravely to her death. See Catherine and Mary Grey, who suffered in slow, agonizing silence for the simple, radical act of refusing to surrender their hearts. Their story never truly vanished. It simply waited. It waited until a shy young woman named Diana brought it all home. Perhaps this is why Princess Diana touched the world so profoundly. She wasn't just a royal wife. She was the people's princess, yes, but she was also something older, something darker, something fiercely, inherently defiant. She was the Tudors' revenge, a bloodline once buried, once broken, now standing in the absolute brightest spotlight of the world, having finally and irrevocably claimed its rightful place. The entire, brutal, secret history that began in a small, dusty French chapel over 500 years ago, sealed with a promise made under the threat of death, still lives on, defiantly burning in the eyes of a future king. This is the true, hidden history of the crown, and you were never meant to know it.